I stepped back inside and closed the door. The shepherd hadn't moved. His eyes met mine, and I don't know if dogs understand bureaucracy, or laws, or the process of surrender and reclamation, but I believe they understand the intention. I believe they know what it means when someone doesn't look away. So I knelt down on my knees, pressing into the old wood floor, and ran my hand slowly down his spine. "You're home," I whispered. His tail brushed once across the floor. That was enough. Later that day, the house felt different. Not lighter, but steadier. The weight of uncertainty had lifted. Not vanished, just shifted its form. The kind of change that happens when grief stops being a ghost and starts becoming part of the furniture. You learn to live around it. You learn to speak again, even if your voice shakes. In the nursery, the quilt was folded, not tucked, not symmetrical, just gently shaped the way a child's hands might fumble with corners. Content to have tried. The pacifier was gone. In its place, resting on the edge of the rug, was a small wooden block, the kind with a letter carved into it. J. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I knew what it meant, but because I did in single quotes. Somehow, that made it more real. That evening, we sat together on the back porch, me in the old deck chair, him at my feet, body turned toward the yard. The sun was setting behind the trees, and the light spilled across the floorboards in long, golden streaks. And there at the edge of the yard, I saw it, a shape, not human, not fully visible, just the vague form of movement, small, low to the ground, wobbling like something just learning to walk. The shepherd saw it too. He rose slowly, ears tilted forward, body alert, but he didn't move toward it. He just watched, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of what I couldn't explain, because it wasn't frightening, it was familiar. It was her. That night, I opened the front door, not wide, just enough to let the air in to tell the house, we are not hiding, we are not waiting anymore. And the shepherd, he didn't return to the door. He went straight to the crib, curled beneath it, as if to say, this is the place I protect now. Not the entrance, not the ending, but the center, the beating heart. Before I turned in, I returned to the nursery. Kneeling beside him, I placed something small beneath the crib, something I'd found earlier that week, buried in the back of a drawer. I hadn't known what it was at first. A photo, folded, faded, a child in mid-step, wearing overalls, tiny fingers reaching toward the camera, and behind her, the shepherd, younger, lighter. His ears are too big for his head, and a baby blanket tugged in his teeth. I slid the photo gently beneath the crib leg and whispered, she still remembers. He didn't stir, just pressed his nose into the quilt and exhaled, not with sadness, not with fear, but with something I hadn't heard from him before. Peace. The wind picked up outside. A storm was coming again, but this time, I didn't feel the need to board up the house. This time, I understood. Storms come, but so do those who weather them, and some storms leave gifts in their wake, like a dog who never left, and a child who returned, not with words, but with weightless, sacred presence. They found the dog curled beside the crib, soaked in the soft flicker of morning light filtering through cracked blinds. He hadn't moved in hours. Just lay there, ribs rising, falling, watching the door like it still meant something. This isn't just a story about a dog. It's about what happens when the heart keeps waiting, even after it's been shattered. This story will break you, and then rebuild you. Like, share, and tell us where in the world you are watching from today. The first time I saw him, the house was already half empty. Boxers leaned open in the hallway. A child's mobile hung lopsided above a crib with no sheets. There was no music, no voices, just the quiet shuffle of papers and the hush of footsteps, trying not to echo. And him, the dog sitting by the door like a soldier at post. German shepherd, old enough to carry scars, young enough to stand sentry. He was lean, stiff, ribs taut beneath damp fur. One ear notched, one eye a little cloudy. He didn't growl, didn't even blink when I came in. Just stared at that front door, I remember. The way his paw shifted once, barely like he was bracing for something. A sound, a shape, a person who never came. The realtor had said the house was ready for inspection. She hadn't mentioned the dog. I didn't speak. I just stood there in the hallway, coat dripping, clipboard forgotten, watching this animal, who seemed so sure someone would walk through that door. Rain ticked softly against the windows. In the living room, toys were still scattered like a memory. No one had cleaned up. A tiny pink shoe, a soft lamb missing one eye. The smell of something faint is not rot, not filth, but memory. Fabric that had once been held. Milk once warmed. The German shepherd didn't look at the toys, didn't look at me. Just the door, like if he blinked, he'd miss her. I crouched down then slowly, like trying not to spook a ghost, and whispered something. I don't even know what. Something soft. Hello, maybe. A promise I hadn't earned. He didn't come to me, didn't snarl either, but his body eased, just a little, as if he'd heard that tone before, once, long ago. His fur was stiff with ash near the belly, singed, maybe. Like smoke had passed too close. I didn't ask why. Not yet. Behind him, I saw it just barely. A baby blanket folded, clean, but worn at the corners, like it had been chewed. Once, maybe twice. And beneath that, a name. Embroidered in thread that had started to fade. Just 4 letters. I didn't read them aloud. I didn't need to, because suddenly I understood. He wasn't guarding the house. He was guarding for a moment, waiting. For a footstep that had stopped echoing weeks ago. I sat with him, right there on the warped hardwood, until the rain stopped. Neither of us moved. The door stayed shut. But he never took his eyes off it. I came back the next day, not because it was my job, not really, but because something about that house, that dog, had taken root in the back of my throat. I hadn't said much to the realtor after I left, just nodded, handed back the keys, and walked out into the quiet gray of a late afternoon that didn't quite know whether it wanted to rain or not. But that dog, he haunted the space behind my eyes, so I returned, keys in hand. No real reason. Number. Scheduled visit. Just a name scribbled into the ledger, and a quiet understanding that sometimes paperwork can wait when a living thing hasn't moved in days. The house greeted me the same way it had the first time: stale air, soft light, and silence heavy enough to lean against. The hallway still smelled like old wood and wet carpet. A shutter somewhere upstairs clicked faintly in the breeze, and he was still there, the German shepherd, still by the door, like no time had passed. Only this time, his head turned just slightly. When I stepped in, a faint flicker of recognition, or maybe just resignation. Hard to tell with dogs like him. They don't show emotion the way people want them to. It's in the tension of the limbs, the slow blink, the way breath sits in their chest. But he knew I'd come back. And I think, on some level, he expected it. I didn't speak, just stepped out of my shoes and moved quietly across the warped floor, kneeling at a respectful distance. This wasn't a pet waiting for treats. He was something else, a monument, a sentry, a scar with a heartbeat. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid. This time, I noticed more, not just the baby blanket by the crib, but the soft indent of where he slept. His fur was shedding in clumps there, mixed with dust and the barest trace of soot. The crib, though, it was pristine, as if someone had wiped it down, even after the house had been left. Someone had tried to hold on. I reached into my bag and pulled out the only thing I'd thought to bring, a bottle of water, half-used. I cracked the cap and set it gently beside him, not looking at him, not asking, just offering. He didn't move for nearly a minute. Then, with a slow, stiff push, he shifted his weight, favoring one leg. the back right one, limping, but not enough to whine. German shepherds don't make noise, unless it's important. He drank slowly, deliberately, then lay back down. I stayed there a long time, long enough for the light to change, for the birds to stop calling outside, long enough to notice a photograph, half tucked under the radiator. It must have fallen behind a dresser that was no longer there. I reached for it slowly, and when I turned it over, dust curled from the corners. The image was old, blurred, a woman in a hospital gown, tired eyes, but smiling, holding a baby wrapped in that same embroidered blanket. And next to her, a man gaunt, unslept, standing tall, one hand resting on the back of a familiar German shepherd. The dog looked younger then, but the eyes were the same focus, same stillness, same storm behind them. I didn't take the photo, just set it gently on the windowsill, close enough to the light that anyone could see it, if they came back. But no one did. The days passed like that. I came back 3 more times, always alone, always quiet. He began to shift more when I arrived. Sometimes he'd meet my eyes. Sometimes he'd rest his chin on his paws and close them again. Not sleep, just rest, a kind of concession. Like he knew the house wasn't his to protect anymore, but that he couldn't leave until someone understood why he'd stayed. It wasn't hunger that kept him. It wasn't fear, either. It was duty. There was a story soaked into the drywall of that place, and it didn't want to be told out loud. Not yet, but it whispered in the stains by the crib legs. The scratch marks are low on the laundry. Room door in the broken bit of collar I found beneath the couch, half burned, still clinging to the faint scent of baby lotion and smoke. It was on the 5th day that I noticed that door, not the front door, the one he watched. Another door, in the hallway closet, slightly ajar. I hadn't thought to look inside. It had always seemed just a place for coats. But something about the way it leaned open that day felt intentional, like it wanted to be found. I pushed it gently inside. There was nothing but a blanket larger than the one by the crib. This one was darker, folded with precision. Beneath it, a torn shoebox. Empty, but not meaningless. The cardboard smelled like signed paper and something else. Something warm and faintly sweet. The kind of scent you don't notice until it's been gone for a while. And on the top of the box, in faded ink, "Bring him home." No names, no dates, just that dot. I sat down, back against the closet wall, and tried to breathe. The German shepherd hadn't moved, but his eyes were on me now, as if waiting not for commands, not for praise, but for understanding. I didn't have it yet, but I had something close. The weight of being alone in a house that remembered more than it wanted to say. As I rose to leave, he stood this time, just a few inches, but it felt like a choice. He followed me to the door, not close, but far enough that I heard the soft pad of his steps on the floorboards. When I opened it, he didn't try to bolt. He just looked up, into the light, and then back at the crib, still watching, still waiting. But now, I wasn't the only one listening. He was waiting for me the next morning, not at the door this time, but just inside the threshold, not lying down, not guarding, just standing. Like something had shifted during the night. Like maybe, for the first time, the silence of that house had settled too deep into his bones, and he needed to know someone else would return. I said nothing, just stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and knelt like I had before. The German shepherd didn't come forward, but he didn't retreat either. His tail stayed still, low, like a pendulum at rest. I watched the tension in his legs, always braced, always ready, and the way his eyes flicked toward the hallway. Every few seconds, he was listening. For something I couldn't hear. Something that hadn't come back. The more time I spent there, the more I felt it. This wasn't just a home someone had left. It was a place caught between breaths, like the whole house was waiting for a door to open, a laugh to echo, a pair of small feet to thump across the floor, and he, this dog, was the only one keeping time. I brought food that day. I hadn't before. I'd resisted the urge, telling myself that this wasn't my dog, this wasn't my place, that someone would eventually come forward with paperwork, or guilt, or a name. But no one had. So I placed the bowl down by the kitchen door, a quiet, respectful distance away, and backed off. He didn't rush. He didn't even sniff. He just stared at it like it was an artifact he didn't know how to use anymore. When he finally approached, it was careful, not hesitant, deliberate. He ate without hunger, like it was something he owed himself, like he had a duty to keep breathing. Afterward, he sat near the photo I'd placed on the windowsill, staring out at the tree-lined street, like he recognized every parked car and empty stroller that passed. I wondered what he saw when he looked through that glass, not the world as it was, but how it had once been. Maybe a mother humming in the kitchen, a father with dark circles under his eyes, pacing with a newborn in his arms. Maybe a child not yet walking reaching toward the air with soft, dimpled fingers. Maybe that's why the front door mattered so much to him, because it was the last place they'd all been real together. I spent hours there that day. I cleaned around him slowly, carefully, never disturbing the things that mattered. I didn't touch the blanket near the crib or the toys still curled under the living room furniture, but I wiped the surfaces, opened windows, let the house breathe, and he followed me, not closely enough that I could feel him, a quiet presence behind me, like a shadow with eyes. At one point I leaned down to straighten a rug by the hallway, and my fingers brushed against something cold and thin, tucked just beneath the edge of the floorboard. A key, not to the front door. I'd seen that one. This was smaller, older, worn at the teeth. It wasn't labeled. I held it in my palm and looked back toward the shepherd. He was sitting near the base of the stairs now, head tilted just slightly, watching like he knew. I tried it in the hallway closet, but it didn't fit, not the kitchen drawer either. It was only when I opened the bedroom, the one across from the nursery, that I saw the lock. A wooden chest, painted over, but chipped at the edges. I don't know why. I hesitated. Maybe because it felt like crossing a line from caretaker to trespasser. But something in the weight of the key told me this wasn't about ownership. It was about memory, and the dog, now sitting behind me, didn't flinch when I turned it. Inside, baby clothes, tiny ones, wrapped in tissue, labeled with dates in careful handwriting, a hospital bracelet, a lock of hair in a zippered pouch, and a collar, not his. Too small, too red, a different name on the tag. It hit me, then not as a fact, but a feeling. He wasn't their first dog. There had been another. You could feel it in the way he moved through the house, like he'd inherited a role that hadn't started with him, like someone else had loved. The child first nuzzled her blanket, curled beneath her crib, and he had stepped into their absence, like it was expected of him. But grief doesn't start when someone dies. It starts the moment you realize they might not stay, and he, this shepherd, had known loss long before this. Later that day, I sat on the back steps with him. The air was heavy with coming rain, the kind that holds the heat close. Leaves hung low on their branches, waiting for the sky to break. He lay beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel his breath against my ankle. It was the first time I saw him close his eyes, only for a moment, just a flicker, like the body remembering rest. When he opened them again, he turned his head slowly and looked toward the nursery window. No sound, no motion, just that steady, aching gaze. I followed his line of sight. The curtains had shifted, in the breeze. Through the sliver of space, I saw it, a small stuffed elephant, propped on the crib's edge. Its fabric is worn thin, trunk bent at the tip, a tear in the seam. I stood and went inside. I picked it up. The dog followed, and when I placed the elephant gently beside the blanket, near his resting spot, he didn't react the way I expected. He lowered his head and nudged it once, then lay down beside it. His paw brushed against the edge, pulling it closer, not like a toy, but like a memory he couldn't let go of. That night, I stayed longer than I should have, until the sun slipped below the street line, and the house turned gold with dusk. He didn't watch the door that night. He watched the crib, as if something had changed, as if just for that evening, he believed she might come back through a different doorway, one of dreams or memories, or the soft rustle of a stuffed elephant in the dark. And maybe he wasn't guarding anymore. Maybe he was grieving. It was the third time he laid beside the crib without watching. The door that I knew something was changing. Not quickly, not loudly, but like water eroding, stone slow, constant, almost imperceptible, until one day the shape is different, and you can't remember what it looked like before. The German Shepherd had always watched the front entrance like it was the axis of his world, the last known place where his person had passed into the unknown. But now, his gaze shifted inward, toward the nursery, toward the soft stillness of things that hadn't been touched in weeks but still carried scent. I didn't disturb him. Instead, I sat in the hallway with the bedroom door half cracked open, letting the golden light spill over the floorboards. As evening approached, my back against the wall, notebook in hand, even though I hadn't written anything in days. There wasn't anything to write, just moments to witness. The wind outside had picked up, brushing softly against the loose siding. A swing in the neighbor's yard creaked faintly, long forgotten. Somewhere far off, a lawnmower hummed through tall grass. But inside that house, time folded into something smaller, something tight and delicate. And that's when I heard it. Not footsteps, not crying, something softer, plastic, sliding gently against hardwood. I rose slowly and stepped into the nursery. The shepherd was sitting up, not stiff, but alert, and beside him, no more than a foot away, the stuffed elephant had moved. Just an inch, maybe two. Not enough to fall, not enough to tumble, just shifted. There was no draft. The windows were closed. I'd tucked it firmly beside the blanket days ago. I looked down at the dog. He was staring at it, ears forward, brow just barely furrowed. He hadn't moved it. I was sure of that, but something had. And then, from the far end of the hallway near the laundry room, came a sound like breath caught in fabric. Not a voice, not even a word, just the faintest, instinctive gasp, like air remembering how to move through tiny lungs. I didn't run. I didn't call out. I just turned, quietly, and walked back into the hallway. The shepherd stayed where he was. Watch me. Trust me. I moved slowly, past the peeling wallpaper, past the hall closet that still smelled like soap and fire. The laundry door was cracked open, same as always. Inside, dust clung to the ceiling vents. A wire basket still held a single baby sock pink with tiny clouds, and an empty bottle of detergent lay on its side like someone had meant to clean more than they could bear to. And there, on the floor, half hidden behind the hamper, was a small handprint near the baseboard. Not dusty clean, fresh. I crouched beside it, heart thudding in my ears, not from fear, from something deeper. Recognition. Grief does strange things to time. It blurs the edges, makes moments echo even when they've ended. I didn't touch the handprint, just looked at it, and in that moment, something in the walls, in the stillness, softened. I felt it, like the hush of someone exhaling after holding their breath far too long. When I returned to the nursery, the German Shepherd was lying back down, head resting beside the stuffed elephant. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them I hadn't seen before. Not just grief, expectation, like he knew what I had seen, like it mattered, that I had seen it. I came every day after that, no longer out of obligation or guilt, but because something was building. Not answers, not revelations, but a quiet kind of presence, a pattern emerging beneath the layers of dust and silence. He began to move differently. He'd rise when I entered, tail twitching softly, not wagging, just acknowledging. When I spoke, he'd tip his head. When I stood too long in one spot, he'd circle behind me, gently brushing my leg like a tether. He was still quiet, still a sentinel, but something in his stillness had loosened. He no longer watched the door. He listened to the house, as if it spoke to him in ways I couldn't yet understand. On the 6th evening, the rain returned, harder this time, a steady downpour that tapped against the windows and painted long shadows down the walls. I was in the nursery, straightening the edge of a forgotten mobile. The stuffed elephant now lay at the center of the room, where the child might have once crawled to reach it. The shepherd lay near the foot of the crib, ears flicking with every sound. And then, through the rhythm of the rain, I heard it. A single, creak dot from the floorboards in the hallway. Not a pipe, not settling, a step, small, deliberate. I looked up, not afraid, but hushed, and in that second, he stood, the shepherd, ears up, body tense, but not fearful. His eyes locked on the doorway. I turned, slow, reverent, and stepped into the hallway. Nothing, no shape, no shadow, just the long corridor of that narrow house. Rain streaking down the windows, light flickering in the kitchen. But there beneath the hall mirror was a toy. I hadn't seen it before. A rattle, shaped like a bear, with peeling paint and a frayed ribbon. It hadn't been there yesterday. I walked toward it, knelt, and picked it up. The ribbon smelled faintly of lavender, baby shampoo, time, back in the nursery. I placed the rattle beside the elephant and sat cross-legged on the floor. The shepherd came beside me, laying his body down so that his fur brushed against my knee, and together, we listened to the breathing of the house, to the memories that moved, when no one was watching, to the presence of something that had not left, not entirely. We stayed that way long after the rain stopped. The baby monitor on the dresser long disconnected, long forgotten, flickered with static, a soft buzz, and then, just for a second, the hum shifted. Not words, not music, just the faintest sound, a breath, a sigh, or a coo, like sleeping. Like remembering how to be close again by the 7th morning. The shepherd had started sleeping in the nursery full time, not beside the door anymore, not even near the hallway where he once stood watch like a soldier who couldn't leave his post. Now, he lay curled between the crib and the window, as if the space itself held something sacred, something he had been assigned to protect long before either of us had found the words for it. The elephant still sat where we'd left it, close to the rattle with its fraying ribbon. Dust didn't seem to touch either one. I'd stopped moving them, stopped tidying, stopped trying to arrange things for the sake of appearance. Some part of me knew better now, knew the house didn't need to be fixed. It needed to be remembered, and that required stillness. It required presence. It required him, the German shepherd. That morning, I opened every window in the house. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and clean, and I wanted to let the place breathe. For the first time, I heard the full range of the outside world pouring in, birdsong woven with distant traffic, the sound of a screen door clapping somewhere down the street, the rush of wind through the brittle leaves of the backyard maple. The dog stood at the center of the nursery and looked toward the light dot, and then something unusual happened. He stepped forward, not just toward the window, but toward the crib, toward the space just beneath it, where shadow met carpet, where warmth once pooled and tiny fingers had clutched the edge of the frame, trying to pull upright. He lay down there, tucked close, not guarding, waiting. I watched him for several minutes before I realized his body had relaxed in a way it never had before, chest rising slowly, legs folded in, tail curled not in tension, but in comfort. And that's when I heard it. The sound that didn't belong, soft, rhythmic, not mechanical, not environmental, a sound that belonged to skin and breath and cloth brushing against skin again, a shuffle from inside the nursery, not near, The door not behind me, but just beside the crib. I turned slowly. There was no visible shape, no movement, but the shepherd raised his head and looked not at me, but downward, toward the space beside him, and then his body shifted gently, deliberately, like he was making room, and that was the first moment. I saw it. Not a child, not a ghost, but the consequence of both. A change in the way the light struck the blanket. A wrinkle pressed into the carpet that hadn't been there before. A sudden fog on the window, low to the glass, where no breath had touched it since the day I arrived. But now, there it was, a patch of condensation, small, oval, as if a baby's mouth had pressed gently against the pane to see what was outside. And then AHANDPRINT. Just one. Tiny fingers. SPLAYED. Fresh. Alive. I didn't move. Not because I was afraid, but because something in my chest cracked open. I felt it pull, like my heart recognizing something older than language. The German shepherd looked up at me again, and his gaze held something I hadn't yet earned. Trust, not because I fed him, not because I stayed, but because I finally understood. He hadn't stayed in the house. He hadn't stayed in the past. He had stayed for her, not to protect her, to wait for her, even when the others had left, even when the rooms had emptied, even when the world moved on and the calendar pages curled and the wallpaper split at the seams. He had waited. Because he knew something we had forgotten, that sometimes the smallest lives don't disappear. They just fall quiet and wait to be heard. That afternoon, I sat on the floor again on the same patch of carpet I'd returned each day, and I didn't bring food, toys, or questions. I brought silence, and it filled the room like light. The shepherd lay beside me, the elephant curled beside him, and in the faintest breath of movement, slower than wind, lighter than dust, the rattle rolled half a turn across the floor. It stopped facing me. The ribbon curled toward my shoe, and I heard the smallest sound I've ever heard. Not a voice, not words, a coo, the kind a baby makes when they wake, not scared, just a present. And in that moment, everything that had felt still began to shift. The room didn't get louder, the walls didn't shake, but the quiet became full, like we weren't alone, like we hadn't been alone for some time. Later that evening, I sat on the front porch as the sun sank behind the rooftops. The house no longer felt heavy. The shadows still clung to corners, but they didn't feel like grief anymore. They felt like memories, the kind you carry, not the kind you run from. And beside me, the shepherd sat tall, watching the street, not waiting, just watching, like the weight he'd carried was now shared. He nudged his head against my shoulder once, just once, and then returned to stillness. That night, I didn't close the nursery door. I left it open, let the hallway breathe, let the light spill in. And sometime in the middle of the night, when I woke from a dream I couldn't quite remember, I walked quietly into the room and found the shepherd sleeping beneath the crib again, and beside him, the elephant, the rattled dot, and a baby sock I hadn't seen before, folded, clean, tucked, just so, as if placed there by a hand that didn't need to be seen to be understood. The next morning, I found them both in the same position I'd left them in. The German shepherd curled beneath the crib, his flank rising and falling in deep, even breaths. The stuffed elephant rested against his side. The baby sock was still there too, tucked between the rattle and the corner of the blanket like a gesture left behind by unseen hands. The room was quiet, but not empty, the kind of quiet you feel in your skin before you hear it in your ears, like a held breath, or the way a lullaby feels when it's been sung so many times the walls remember. I didn't speak, I didn't call his name, not that I even knew it yet, but as soon as I stepped into the room, he lifted his head, not in alarm, in recognition. I was no longer a stranger to him, not a visitor, not a caretaker, something else, a participant in something he had carried alone for far too long. And in that moment, I realized the weight was beginning to shift, not lifted, but shared. He stood slowly and stretched, his limbs creaking with the kind of wear that only comes from long hours spent lying in grief. And then he walked to me, unhurried, direct. He pressed his head against my thigh and waited. It was the first time he'd initiated contact. The first time his body said what his voice could not. I placed my hand gently against the top of his head. His fur was thick, still rough in patches near his haunches where old scarring lived beneath. I didn't pet him. I simply held him there, letting him know I understood, not everything, but enough. We moved together that morning through the house, down the hallways, into the kitchen. He stayed close, never underfoot, never needy, just a present, watching, accompanying, a shadow stitched to the edges of my footsteps. In the kitchen, I opened a new bag of food, of the good kind, not just what I could afford from the corner store. And he ate beside me, slow and silent, with the dignity of a creature who had never begged for anything. Afterward, we sat near the back door, which I left open just enough to let the morning air in. Outside, the lawn was overgrown, weeds coiling between the cracks in the patio. A child's chair, pale blue, sun-bleached, leaned on its side near the fence. I didn't have to ask to know he'd seen her sit in it. Knew he'd watched her there. Maybe, on a morning like this, soft light breaking through the clouds, while the world held still long enough for a child's laughter to stretch wide across the sky. He let out a breath, long and low, not a whine, just release. That afternoon, I took him on a walk, not far, just down the block and back. He hesitated at first, standing at the edge of the porch, one paw hovering in the air like a question. His eyes scanned the street with the suspicion of a soldier who had once been stationed at the front line and had never quite left it. But I waited, and eventually, he stepped down. We moved slowly, not just for him, but for the house, like we were unwinding something old and brittle, giving memory room to stretch its legs. He didn't pull on the leash. He didn't bark. He simply walked beside me. Every few steps, he would pause and sniff at something unseen, a patch of sidewalk, a lamppost, a fence post, where old scent lingered like forgotten names. His ears flicked with each sound, every passing car, every bird call, every breath of wind, but he never strayed far. He always returned to my side. It wasn't obedience, it was a choice. When we came back, the nursery had changed again, only slightly. The crib mobile, the one I'd straightened days ago, was spinning not fast, just a slow, lazy turn. The window was shut. No air moved in the room, and yet there it was gently rotating, the small shapes of clouds and stars swinging in a slow, soundless arc. The shepherd stepped in before me, ears twitching, tail low. He walked directly to the crib and sat. Didn't lie down, just sat, watching, waiting, like something was happening, and he needed to witness it. I knelt near the threshold and watched with him. The elephant was still there, but now it has been moved again, just a few inches. Its trunk pointed upward, a baby's gesture, or maybe something more instinctive, a reaching. And near the crib leg, almost imperceptible, a tiny indentation, too small for a foot, too wide for a paw, a knee. Maybe pressed into the carpet, like a child learning to crawl again. I didn't speak, didn't move. Just breathing in the moment, and beside me, the shepherd did the same, his head lowered slightly, his ears relaxed. He wasn't on guard anymore. He was part of something, a ritual, a reunion. That evening, I lit a candle in the hallway. I don't know why. Maybe because grief feels less heavy when softened by warmth. Or maybe because the house had held so much coldness that the smallest flicker of flame felt like permission to begin again. The shepherd sat beside the flame for a long time. He didn't blink much. I didn't sleep, just watched the light. It flickered against his fur, casting strange shadows across his face. But they didn't look like scars anymore. They looked like symbols, as if the house was writing something across his skin. A letter, maybe, a prayer, and he was learning how to carry it. That night, something else shifted. I woke just past midnight to the sound of nails on hardwood, soft, deliberate. I stepped into the hallway and found him not beneath the crib, but beside the nursery door, facing out, watching the hallway, protecting. And from inside the room, a rustle, not loud, but unmistakable. The sound of a child turning over in sleep, the faint jingle of the rattle being touched, then falling still, in one quiet breath, shallow, warm. Alive. It was the way he looked at the rattle. The next morning that told me something inside him had shifted. Again, not curiosity, not even longing, but something closer to acknowledgement. The German Shepherd sat beside it like you'd sit beside a memory that had returned with new meaning. His ears were relaxed, his body at ease, but his eyes didn't leave that small object, the frayed ribbon, the tiny bare face, the hollow sound it made when rolled by unseen hands. The rattle hadn't moved during the night, but the light around it had changed. There was warmth in the nursery again, not from the sun, not even from the furnace I occasionally ran to keep the pipes from freezing. This warmth came from something deeper, like the air had remembered how to hold a heartbeat. I stood in the doorway, hand resting lightly on the frame, and just watched him. The dog, the guardian, the one who had not left. His chest rose and fell, slow and certain. And for the first time since I'd met him, I realized I wasn't watching a dog haunted by the past. I was watching a creature adapting to the present. The invisible child, the one who never made a sound, never showed a face, had become part of our rhythm. Not a ghost, not a hallucination, but a presence stitched into the corners of the room, woven into the threads of silence that stretched between breath and gesture. And now the dog was no longer carrying the burden alone. Now we were both holding space together that day. I didn't clean, I didn't fix or organize. I didn't move anything at all. I just sat on the rug in the center of the nursery, with my back against the crib and my legs outstretched. The shepherd joined me after a moment, lowering himself with a quiet groan and settling beside my thigh. He pressed his weight gently into me, not asking, not needing anything, just anchoring. For the first time, I felt the pull of stillness, not as something forced, but as something chosen. The house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a breath, being held between verses, and a lullaby waiting to resume. Somewhere outside, wind moved through the eaves, but inside, stillness, then a flutter. The elephant rolled, not far, not fast, just enough to shift its stitched eyes toward the window, and a single, delicate sound, softer than any sigh I'd ever heard. The whisper of a baby's hand brushing against cotton. The shepherd raised his head, ears lifted, not alarmed, attentive. He turned, stood, and walked a slow circle around the toy. And then he did something I hadn't seen before. He bowed, not a stretch, not a yawn, a deliberate bow. Front legs extended, chest lowered, tail steady. A posture I recognized only from training manuals. Play invitation. Not to me, to her, whoever she was. However she remained, and in the next breath, the rattle jiggled, not rolled, not fell. Jiggll, as if small fingers had given it one playful shake. The moment passed without fanfare. The dog sat again. The light returned to normal. But something inside me had changed. It was hard to describe, a loosening, a thaw, not of fear, but of the parts of myself that had stayed frozen for far too long, the parts that understood what it meant to wait at a door that no longer opened, what it meant to guard the space someone had left behind, even when no one else remembered their scent, what it meant to lose, and yet remain. Later that day, I pulled down an old quilt from the hallway closet and spread it out in the nursery. The air had turned colder, and though the heater rattled along, the floor remained unforgiving. I wanted the shepherd to have comfort. Not because he needed it, but because he deserved it. He watched as I laid it down, then, without hesitation, curled into the middle of it and rested his chin on the edge. Behind him, the light dimmed with the slow descent of the afternoon. I didn't turn on a lamp. I just sat, and in the lengthening silence, I felt something approaching, not physically, but emotionally. A presence, like something walking toward me through memory, barefoot, uncertain, but real. And then, a sound, a new one. Fabric, creasing. Not mine. His. Tiny. Rhythmic. Like a child shifting weight. And then the smallest thump. A step. The shepherd rose, not urgently, but with reverence. His eyes scanned the far side of the room, and then lowered, toward the floorboards. I turned my head. There, just beside the leg of the crib, was a handprint. Fresh. This one smeared slightly, as if the child had stumbled, caught herself, beside it. A faint scuff. Round, barely visible, like the mark of a foot brushing into dust. I knelt, not to study it, not to prove it, but to honor it, and the dog came beside me, lowering himself into a slow sit, his body perfectly aligned with the crib's edge. And that was when I whispered, not loud. Just enough for him to hear. She's still here. His ears twitched, but he didn't move. He didn't have to. He already knew. That night, I stayed longer than usual. The stars came out above the house, and the wind pushed clouds across the moonlight. In the living room, I lit a second candle. Let it flicker against the framed photo on the windowsill, the one I'd found weeks ago. The mother, the child, the man with the tired eyes, and the proud, broken posture, and the younger version of the dog beside them. The dog who had already known grief once before. The dog who had chosen to stay. Even when all the others had gone, the candlelight trembled against the glass. I thought of how long he must have waited, through the seasons, through storms, through the ache of knowing he couldn't fix what had happened, only stay near the pieces of it. And now, at last, those pieces were moving again. Not healing. Not yet, but shifting. As if the child, wherever she had gone, had found her way back. And she was not alone. She was never alone, because something had stayed, someone had waited, and now, so have I. The first knock came 3 days later. Not loud, not angry. Just 2 sharp taps against the front door, wood on wood. Like the end of a clipboard or a ringed finger. But even before the sound finished echoing through the hallway, the German shepherd was already on his feet. He didn't bark, didn't lunge. He just stood, ears forward, muscles alert. His body took up the doorway, like it was instinct, like he'd always been waiting for this moment, not with fear, but with finality. I moved behind him slowly, carefully, out of habit more than worry. The knock didn't come again, just those 2 taps and then silence. I placed my hand on the shepherd's shoulder. His body was warm, taut beneath his fur, but he didn't move away. He leaned into my palm, not enough to shift his stance, just enough to acknowledge me. That quiet, grounding pressure, the kind that says, stay close. I peered through the window. No one, just the porch, still damp from the rain the night before, but on the top step, tucked into the wood grain, like it had been set with care, was a slip of paper. No envelope, no tape, just folded once, face down. I stepped outside, barefoot, gravel biting into my heel. The shepherd stayed behind, body rigid in the doorway. I picked up the note and unfolded it. 3 words. All uppercase, all printed, not written. Is he yours? No name. No return address, just that. I turned the paper over, blank. I looked up and down the street. The neighborhood was still. No cars running. No doors closing. The wind moved through the trees like it had nothing to do with us. I stepped back inside and closed the door. The shepherd hadn't moved, still staring toward where the knock had come from, still watching. but his eyes now held something different, not fear, not confusion, resignation like. He knew the quiet wasn't going to last. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the house felt louder. Every breath felt borrowed. The nursery, though the nursery stayed calm, as if untouched by the intrusion. The rattle remained at the edge of the crib. The quilt lay smooth, where I'd left it. The elephant hadn't shifted, but the air felt braced, like the house itself was holding still, waiting to see if we were going to be pulled back into the world that had forgotten how to love gently. The shepherd curled in his usual place beneath the crib, but his ears stayed raised all night, even in sleep. He was listening, and so was I the next morning. I checked the front step again. Nothing but the mailbox held something new. A printed flyer. Standard issue, local shelter, a list of found animals with small grainy pictures and ID numbers beneath them. Lost hounds, a brindle mix, a few pit bulls, and at the very bottom, a blurry, underexposed photo of a German shepherd. No collar, no name, just intact male, older, found near 8th and Willow. Nitrogen monoxide chip. Hold until Friday. Friday 2 days away. My stomach turned slowly. 8th and Willow. That was 5 blocks from here. The shepherd had likely wandered there before he found this house again. Or maybe he'd never actually left. Maybe someone else had reported him, thinking he was stray, thinking he was abandoned. I folded the flyer and slid it under a stack of papers. The dog watched me the whole time. From the hallway, eyes quiet, eyes knowing. I didn't speak. There was no point. He already understood what the paper meant. He'd lived long enough to know that the world didn't always ask questions with kindness. Sometimes, it just removed what it didn't recognize. That evening, I opened every window again. Let the air move freely through the house, through the memories and the stillness and the places where laughter had once lived. The shepherd followed me from room to room, a silent echo. He paused at the back door and stood for a long time, staring into the yard, and then he did something I hadn't seen since the first day. He sat by the door, the front door, not the nursery, not the crib, the door, the one he used to guard. I stood at the edge of the hallway and watched him. His body wasn't tense. It was still resolved. I walked over, crouched beside him. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw something that undid me. Acceptance. Not of death, not of abandonment, but of sacrifice. Like he had made a choice long ago, and it had never been about being claimed. It had always been about protecting something long enough for someone else to understand what it had meant. I sat on the floor beside him, back against the door, and for the first time in weeks, I let the weight of everything reach me. Not as grief, but as inheritance. This wasn't just his story, it was mine too now. Not because I'd earned it, but because I'd stayed, because I had sat through the silence, through the slow movement of toys and the breath behind cribs, and had chosen not to leave, even when the stillness began to ache. He leaned his body into mine again, heavy, warm, and I whispered, "You're not going anywhere." His ear twitched, and then he rested his head on my knee. But the next morning, there was a van parked at the end of the street. Not close, not facing the house, just sitting there, engine running, windows tinted. It didn't move for over an hour. The shepherd stayed by the window the entire time. His eyes never left it. Even when I offered food, even when I sat near him, his focus never shifted. And when the van finally pulled away, I thought I saw his chest rise in something like relief. But only for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the nursery alone. That night, I left the lights on, just low ones in the hall, by the crib, near the front window, and sometime after midnight, the shepherd came to my room for the first time. He didn't climb into the bed, didn't whine. He just lay down beside the door, facing outwardly, like a promise, like a quiet, "I'm still here." The van didn't return the next morning, but something else did. A knock, louder this time. 4 slow raps that echoed through the hallway like something final. The shepherd was already at the door by the second. 1. Not barking, not pacing, just there, planted like he had been the first day I saw him. His ears pinned back slightly, eyes locked on the wood like he could see straight through it. I stepped in behind him, barefoot again, the cold floor against my skin grounding me in the moment. I didn't open the door, not yet, just looked through the side window again at the small warped pane that barely offered a full view of the porch. This time, there was someone, woman, late 40s maybe, city-issued jacket, clipboard in hand, and she wasn't moving on, she was waiting. I opened the door a few inches, hand on the shepherd's collar, not because I feared him, but because I could feel how badly he wanted to protect something he couldn't lose again. The woman gave a small nod, a practiced smile, no malice in her face. Just protocol. Morning, she said. I'm with County Animal Services. We received a report about a shepherd wandering this block last month. Neighbors said they saw one entering this property. I didn't answer. She held up a printed photo, blurry, washed out. But him, standing at the edge of a parking lot, before the rain, before the crib, before everything began to realign. We're just checking in, she said. We've had him on a hold. That hold ends this afternoon. She looked past me then, toward the dog at my side. He's lucky, she added, voice softening. Not many strays last this long without someone stepping up. My hand tightened slightly on his fur. He's not a stray, I said quietly. No, Chip, she replied. No tags. He has a name, I told her. She waited. I didn't give it, because I didn't know it. Not the one he had before, but I knew the one he had now. Mine. She handed me a paper, neutral language, checkboxes, signature, lines. It didn't say anything cruel, but it didn't say anything true either. Unclaimed, transfer eligible. He may have belonged to someone before, she said gently. We're required to give them a chance to come forward. But if no one does, I came forward, I interrupted. She gave a tight smile. One of those sad, administrative ones. I'm not here to argue, she said. Just here to serve notice. She tucked a carbon copy into the mailbox and stepped back down the porch. I'll be back tomorrow, she said. Then she paused and looked at him one more time. Honestly, she added, voice low, almost to herself. I hope he's home. Then she walked away. I closed the door. The shepherd hadn't moved, still staring at the space where she'd stood, and something in him sagged then, like a cord had been pulled too tight, and now it was unraveling. He lay down, slowly, head on his paws, body folding in on itself like he was preparing for goodbye again. But I couldn't let him carry that weight alone. I dropped to the floor beside him, laid a hand gently between his shoulder blades, and stayed there long after the sound of the van faded from the street. I'm not letting them take you, I whispered. His eyes didn't close, but they softened, like maybe he believed me. That evening, I returned to the nursery. The quilt had been folded, not by me, not by the dog. Tidy corners, soft creases, as if small hands had done it, not perfectly, but with purpose. The elephant was perched on top, its trunk pointing toward the door, and beside it, on the crib mattress, something new, a pacifier, dustless, pink, familiar. It hadn't been there before. I walked toward it slowly, the air thick around my shoulders like a blanket of memory being laid down, one layer at a time. I picked it up. The rubber was warm, worn slightly on one edge, like it had been held in a mouth that hadn't needed words to be heard. I didn't cry, but my throat closed in a way that made breathing feel ceremonial, and when I turned around, the shepherd was standing in the doorway, eyes on me, unmoving, like he saw the change to like he recognized that we were nearing something, not an ending, but a moment of choice. That night, I didn't sleep. Neither did he. I sat on the porch until well past midnight, The paper from Animal Services folded in my lap. The shepherd lay at my feet, head pressed against my ankle, and inside, the house held its breath. I could feel the presence. Not walking. Not reaching. Just near. Watching us the way we had watched it. The child, her memory, her echo, had become something more than grief. She was part of the air now, and we weren't guarding her anymore. We were guarding her promise. Just before dawn, I took him for a walk. No leash, no collar, no collar. He stayed by my side, like he'd done it 1,000 times, and when we passed the end of the block, the spot where the van had parked, he paused, looked both ways, then sat still, like a choice had been offered, and a line had been drawn. I crouched beside him, palm resting against his chest. His heartbeat was steady, strong. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. He stood again when I did, and we walked home together. Inside, the house felt changed, like something had opened. While we were gone, the nursery door stood ajar, and for the first time I heard it. A single step. Tiny, not echoing, just a present. The shepherd heard it too. He moved toward it, without hesitation, and I followed. We stood in the doorway together, and though no one was there, the quilt was unfolded again. The elephant had rolled, and the pacifier lay on the rug. The shepherd crossed the room and lay beside it. No tension, no waiting, just rest. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. The woman from county came back the next morning. I knew she would. I had felt it in the stillness before dawn. In the way the air sat too quietly inside the house, like even the walls were holding their breath. The van was parked at the curb when I stepped out onto the porch, paper in hand. No lights, no sirens, just a vehicle that looked like any other delivery truck, except what it carried was absent. Separation, paperwork with no names and empty lines that didn't ask the right questions. She was already walking up the path, same coat. Same clipboard, but this time, her expression had changed. She looked tired. Maybe she recognized the house. Maybe she had been doing this job too long. Or maybe, like me, she had once stood in a room where something small and soft had gone quiet, and the silence had followed her home. She nodded once. Good morning. I didn't answer right away. Just held the paper out toward her, the form she had left in the mailbox the day before. Signed. She took it, with a soft rustle, her eyes dropping to the signature line. Then she looked past me, into the open doorway, and there he was, the German shepherd, sitting, tall and still, just behind the threshold. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched her, and in that moment, I realized he wasn't waiting to be saved. He was waiting to see if I would stand up. Not for myself, for him. She studied him for a long time, then folded the paper and tucked it into her jacket. We'll file it, she said softly. If anyone comes forward, they won't, I said. Something in my voice must have told her what she needed to hear. She nodded again. Not official, not mechanical. Humans, he's single quotes, yours, she said, and then she walked away. No inspection, no clipboard questions, no collar. Check. Just the quiet exit of someone who'd seen what she needed to see. A dog who had been claimed, not by force, but by presence.